Hi, everyone. So my clock tells me it's 1:30. We've got lots of people in the room, in the house, apparently. So here we go. We've got, for those of you who've been coming to SAPICS conferences forever, we've got one of our very favorite special guests, Abe ESHKENAZI, who is the CEO of ASCM. We go way back, and Abe is a great supporter of SAPICS, a great friend, and we are very proud to represent ASCM in South Africa, we being SAPICS. Abe has done us a pre-recording of a session, but he is here. He's going to join us for Q&A. So please watch and enjoy the session. And if you've got questions, please post them in the discuss, and we will discuss them with him afterwards. So I'm going to share my screen, and away we go.
Thank you, everyone. It's my pleasure to join you today. My hope is that I could have joined you in person, but obviously today's environment, the challenges that we face, does prevent us from getting together. But it doesn't prevent us from sharing information and some of the plans that we have, not only to respond in the current environment, but some of the things that we need to do to move forward as an industry. So let's get into some of the issues that we're dealing with today and in the future. Obviously, the impact on global supply chains from the dynamic forces that we face every day has changed what we do, how we do it, where we do it. There isn't an aspect of supply chain that hasn't changed because of the pandemic and the resulting issues that we face with it. As we take a look at some of the changes that we've got on the screen here that have impacted supply chain, but it's important to note that the pandemic was just one of the concerns that we are paying attention to over the past year. When you take a look at the other issues that we're facing here between climate change and environmental, as well as child labor and a whole host of other challenges, it's clear that we have a significant challenge on our hand. We had it before the pandemic. It's only been exacerbated by the issues that we're facing through the pandemic. So let's take a look at some of the issues that we're dealing with that drive supply chains and some of the impacts that it has on our lives. First, the awareness of supply chain has never been greater. It wasn't that long ago that we had to explain to our friends and our family what we did for a living. What was supply chain? What do you supply? Were basic questions that came through when you told somebody that you worked in supply chain. The past year has put supply chain into everybody's vocabulary and into our lives. From the surges that we saw to shifts in demand to the resulting vaccines, as well as the ventilators that we had to produce across the globe, each of these exposed a significant challenge within our supply chains and within the plans that we make and how we affect our supply chains. It was always just in time for our organizations and supply chains. We rapidly responded to consumer needs across the globe, irrespective of the challenges that we faced. But it's clear that we are facing greater challenges today than we've ever faced in the past. When we take a look at the frequency just of the natural disasters that we're facing, we're seeing that not only in frequency, but in duration and severity, there have been significant challenges to not only supply chains, but the impact and the environment has had on all of our lives. What's different now is that people understand the difference between the supply chain and the positive impact the supply chain had in the past. We're no longer seeing that. Now we're having to defend the supply chain, and why hasn't it responded appropriately when we knew that there were all these disruptions? But it's important to note that these natural disasters, they didn't occur yesterday. When you take a look at the frequency and the duration of them and the severity of them, it's clear that we are facing a very dynamic marketplace. The UN Global Report that just came out earlier indicated that supply chains and the impact that environments were having across the globe were at a breakpoint for organizations and for economies alike. Managing uncertainty and risk has always been a part of the job of supply chain managers. This is not new. However, what we're facing is greater severity, greater disruptions to our supply chain and the frequency. Companies now face a much more complex and dynamic threat to their supply chains that include trade, geopolitical tensions, extreme weather, cybersecurity, volatility in consumer demand, as well as resource depletion. Each of these has a significant impact on our supply chains. focusing just on the supply chain and the environmental issues that occurred would have been a significant step forward for us a number of years ago. Now it's imperative that we assess what the impact that we're having and supply chains are having on our environment, and more importantly, on each of our lives. It's important to note the disruption that we're facing right now is creating awareness of supply chains. When you take a look at all the various aspects of what has occurred in the marketplace, everything seems to drive back to supply chain and the impact that these disruptions have had, whether it was the Suez Canal or the weather. Each of these has had an impact on our supply chains. As I indicated before, supply chains used to be a very effective and efficient way to get products to market. Consumers and patients alike expected low cost, high variety, and rapid delivery of almost everything that they bought, and we responded. Supply chains were extremely efficient prior to the pandemic, but in a lot of ways, we were buying time. We were ignoring a lot of the issues that had an impact on supply chain and focused only on the just-in-time. However, what we saw is that just-in-time, while effective for getting low-cost materials and products to consumers, what we didn't prepare for was just in case. And the disruptions that we're facing right now have created significant challenges for supply chains and the professionals that drive it. Each of you, I know, have significant challenges, not only in forecasting, but responding to the changes in demand, as well as the changes in resources that you count on to provide your manufacturing for your organizations. What's important to note, consumers' expectations haven't changed. They still expect low cost, high variety, and rapid delivery, irrespective of the challenges that we face. But more and more, we're seeing greater awareness of supply chain and the impact that it has on our world. It's not just consumers and patients alike that impact supply chain or the demand. When we're seeing the geopolitical, and we're seeing trade, and we're seeing a variety of different impacts to supply chain, are also creating significant awareness of supply chain. But more importantly, what we're seeing as well is that the awareness of supply chain does often align with your experience. And what we're seeing right now is that the awareness of supply chain, specifically on younger consumers, is significant. They not only have a greater attention for the impact to our environment, but more importantly, they understand that they will partner with organizations that do align with their expectations for sustainability in the marketplace. There isn't a day that goes by that we don't see a supply chain story in the news. And more importantly, we're seeing that younger generations care about not only the environment, but they want to be socially responsible in the way that they do, and the way that they act, and the way that companies act. And they will pay more and participate more with organizations that have the same focus on environmental, ethical, and economic sustainability as they do on just-in-time and low cost. So the focus on the supply chains and an effective delivery of our products and services is creating a significant awareness within the consumer market, and we need to respond appropriately. If you're wondering where a lot of this occurs and why are we seeing the significant attention paid to supply chain, all you need to do is take a look at the news. There isn't a day that goes by that we don't see a reference to supply chain, on availability of products and services, on the competency of individuals to serve our supply chains, on hiring, on retention, on diversity and inclusion. Each of these has a significant impact on supply chain. Supply chain professionals have always been at the forefront of organizations' responsiveness. When you take a look at the issues that we're faced here, not only on this page, but I'm sure each one of you, supply chain professionals are at the forefront of organizations' responsiveness, not only to the disruptions, but to the forecasts as well. What we're seeing in the past, that this occurred without very little attention that was paid to these individuals and what they did. Now, attention is paid to every aspect of the supply chain, and our members and you as supply chain professionals now are in the forefront. And the world is seeing and understanding what supply chain does and the impact that it has on our lives. I couldn't be more proud of the work that supply chain professionals have done, but we have a long way to go. We've only scratched the surface in terms of preparing individuals to face the types of challenges that we see now today and in the future. It's important to note that as we go through the changes in responding to the pandemics, we need to do so as individuals, but we also need to do so as organizations. It's important to note that as we viewed supply chains and the impact that it had, we started to see differentiation in how companies responded to it. And it drove us to ask a couple of questions. Well, how do companies respond to challenges? And more importantly, what are the organizations that are ahead of the curve? What are they doing differently? And so we were fortunate enough to partner with the Economist Intelligence Unit on a benchmark on not only understanding resiliency for organizations, but more importantly, sustainability for supply chain professionals and for the supply chains themselves. What we wanted to see was how organizations were responding to the current disruption. Were they responding to get back to where they were, or were they using this as an opportunity to leverage their learnings and move past the current disruption and ensure that they had the appropriate supply chains and responses for the future? We're very fortunate to partner with The Economist, and let's get into some of the findings here to give you a better sense of what we're seeing and, more importantly, what some of the leading organizations are doing to respond to the challenges in their supply chains and beyond. First, one of the things we wanted to see was how benchmark companies plan to build resiliency over the next 3 to 5 years. And it's interesting to note, what you see among the top priorities for organizations is making supply chains more socially and environmentally sustainable. I don't think this would have been the number one response if we would have done this 5 to 6 years ago. I think we would have seen a much greater focus on low cost, on integration with suppliers. A lot of the things that you're seeing here in terms of operational excellence, but now the resiliency and the response to disruptions has taken a much bigger role for organizations. Making supply chains more socially and environmentally sustainable, as indicated here, was the number one benchmark way that companies plan to respond over the next 3 to 5 years. That's a significant step up for organization. But what's also interesting is the number of items that came above 20%. So when you see the top items here, almost the top 10 items, all above 20%, you have to ask yourself, is it reasonable that we can expect supply chain professionals to approach and address every one of these disruptions and challenges accordingly? This is the challenge for supply chain professionals today. If you wanted to take a look at a supply chain professional's job description, read this list of how companies need to respond to, because this is what companies are going to be asking supply chain professionals to do in the future. This is a significant step forward for organizations in identifying how supply chains affect the entire organization. There isn't an aspect of the company that is not affected by supply chain. When you take a look at the various responses here, I am struggling to find an area that is not within the supply chain manager's purview in terms of how to respond to disruptions, and more importantly, what we need to do to not only respond, but to accelerate a response to the disruption. It's also interesting. One of the things that we wanted to see also was, are companies managing the disruption to get back to where they were, or more importantly, using it as an opportunity to use the learnings and move their organizations well beyond the current disruption to ensure that they are sustainable beyond the current disruption. So the first is that we wanted to see how organizations responded. And it's interesting, a significant number of organizations wanted to prepare and get back to where they were. Just get me back to normal, what was assumed normal before. But it's also interesting that organizations also use this to extend their supply chain and say, you know what, this is an opportunity for us to fundamentally change the way that we view our systems, and more importantly, that we need to be much more agile and resistant to the disruptions, and that we need to spring forward. So they use the disruption as an opportunity to radically change the way that they responded to disruptions in the past, and more importantly, ensure strategic sustainability for the future. So it's not just a function of getting back to where you were, it's more a function of taking the lessons learned and the data that you're gleaning from the disruption and saying, okay, we can do better. We can change our organization to be much more resilient and much more responsive to changes, so that when disruptions occur in the future, and they will, however, they won't be what we've experienced today, they rarely are, we are going to be much better prepared as an organization to respond to these challenges, and more importantly, to spring forward, to ensure that we have an organization that's much more responsive between the real-time challenges and the short-term considerations, as well as the bigger, more difficult shocks that are going to occur in the future. This is now part of supply chain managers' job, not only the current resiliency and sustainability for their organization, but ensuring that they are sustainable over the next 3, 5, 10 years. becoming significantly more difficult, not only with the disruption that we're facing today, but obviously with the various disruptions that we're going to face in the future. One of the things that was interesting that came out of the study was the impact on climate change. As I indicated a little bit before, the UN had just came out with a report, and it was really an eye-opening report. It should not have been a surprise to anybody, but I think what was really interesting was just the severity of the disruptions that we're facing today. One of the things that we gleaned out of the work with the EIU was that on average, 60% of the company had, carbon risk lies within their supply chain. That's a significant part. What was interesting is that over half the companies had a way to, assess how their carbon pricing and affect their supply chain. However, unfortunately, less than half of the companies benchmarked or set targets to reduce those supply chain emissions. So target setting is an easy part of the process. Establishing what your baseline is, monitoring it, and more importantly, identifying how the impact on supply chain is much harder. More importantly, it requires data across the supply chain and aligned from your suppliers. And I think this is one of the areas that we've seen the disruption have a significant impact, and that is visibility and transparency throughout our supply chain. Often it was not your tier one suppliers that caused the disruption and caused delays in your supply chain. Oftentimes it was tier three, tier four suppliers, very small parts that had significant impact on organizations. So the visibility and transparency that was necessary for organizations to be able to predict and withstand the changes or the disruptions, we did not get those early warning systems. For benchmark companies, this was not a significant part of their target setting, was the visibility into their organization and the impact that their suppliers had on their carbon pricing and their carbon footprint. It's important to note that benchmark companies for Scope 3 emissions, they lacked information. Only 16 of 308 companies that we surveyed indicated that they had information towards progress towards setting their own targets. That's a significantly low number. Additionally, alignment with suppliers does not, it's not as significant and it's not as consistent across the supply chain. Yielding better data and preparing with your suppliers to understand the impact on your supply chain is a critical part of this, but that requires visibility and transparency across your supply chain, not through your tier one supplier. We need greater accountability and consistency. With that comes data. And so therefore, focusing on the data and the information necessary to prepare for the reports is a critical part of what supply chain professionals do today. It even becomes more critical as we extend our visibility and transparency into the supply chain. I want to pivot a little bit here and talk about one of the areas that also has a significant part in supply chain, and that is talent development. This has been an issue for our organization and for our member companies alike. We are seeing a significant challenge with DE&I, not only within supply chains, but from the individuals in schools that are considering opportunities within supply chain. This drove us to try to understand a little bit more about how organizations are doing. So we partnered with Gartner to do a survey of organizations on how their DE&I initiatives have responded to not only the disruption, but more importantly, how are they going to use DE&I to advance their organization in talent development, leadership development, mentoring, as well as role models. Some of the survey findings. First, over half the companies surveyed do have DE&I initiatives. That's a fantastic step forward for organizations, and it has increased over the past few years. However, only 23% have committed to formal targets or goals. So while we have initiatives, we're not setting out the goals, nor are we reporting on it. More importantly, diversity efforts do matter with company size. What we found is that the larger organizations not only have initiatives, but report out more consistently, more than the small and medium-sized businesses. We need to be able to ensure that we are affecting a DE&I at every aspect. And more importantly, when I talked a little bit before about diversity and inclusion, as well as visibility, this accounts for your partners as well. So it not only is in your organization, but it's outside your organizations that we need to focus on DE&I. One of the other data points that we saw is only 9% of VPs in supply chain organizations are people of color. So while we're having some positive impacts on gender and getting more women into supply chain, we're not seeing that same pickup on people of color or other diverse demographics within the supply chain. We have a significant challenge in attracting, retaining, and promoting individuals within supply chain. This is historic. This did not occur just through the pandemic. This has been a long-standing issue for supply chain. Prior to the pandemic, a Department of Labor study indicated for every 6 openings that we had in supply chain, we had 1 qualified candidate. This has been exacerbated by the work at home and the challenges that we see with not only education, but competency. Preparing individuals for jobs in supply chain has become a significant challenge as organizations seek talent that just is not available today. The search for talent is even more critical today than it ever has been, and the ability and the capability of individuals needs to match what organizations are looking for. So this is where academic organizations have stepped up to provide foundations, where ASCM and other organizations provide much more competency-based content for individuals in ensuring that they have not only the ability, but the competency necessary to deliver what organizations are looking for. This is a significant part of us addressing not only the workforce talent, but there is a ready pool of capable and able individuals if we can only expand our search and our ability to recruit and retain individuals of diverse demographics. One of the other survey reports that we had was our salary survey, and that is understanding a little bit more how organizations are attracting and retaining talent. We do have some challenges here. As indicated on this chart, we have a significant gap based on ethnicity and race. You'll see that white individuals, outperform in terms of their counterparts on salary only. This is a significant challenge. While we saw some closure in terms of demographics on gender, we're not seeing that same closure for race and ethnicity. We need to do a much better job on attracting and retaining individuals of color through their organization. But it also extends to opportunities for advancement and promotion. We're seeing that individuals, while oftentimes we get them into the company, we're not providing them the same opportunities for advancement or professional development within the organization. So oftentimes they're overlooked when job opportunities or promotions are available for the organization. We need to respond greater diversity within organizations and provide role models and mentors at every step along the way. It's critical that individuals see that they have an opportunity to develop not only their own talents, but contribute to organization success. I indicated before that we did make some progress on gender equity. What was interesting was the pay for women. It is outpacing the pay for men for under 40. That is a significant step forward. However, while we're getting them into the organization, we're not seeing them advance. And unfortunately, the pay gap becomes inverted. And that means men start earning much greater than women the longer that individuals stay within supply chain. It's so counterintuitive that we get them into the job, but yet we don't provide opportunities for them to advance. We don't give them leadership opportunities. We don't give them mentoring opportunities or become role models for their organization in terms of not only recruiting, but retaining individuals and allowing them to develop into leaders. We have a significant opportunity. There is a huge resource talent pool out there. Again, if we open up our aperture and our willingness to engage individuals of different demographics, we have a ready pool out there, but we need to ensure that equity in pay and opportunities for promotion exists at every step along the way for larger organizations as well as for smaller organizations. Indicated before that the pay gap has improved over time. You'll see that the pay gap for men and women has closed. However, the longer that women stay in the marketplace and the longer tenured individuals, the pay gap ranges from 12 to 23%, 23,000. That's a significant gap. It's a disincentive for individuals to stay with organizations. So for companies that have responded and are recruiting individuals, specifically women, into their organization, consider people of color, consider ethnicity as part of your demographics when you're recruiting individuals. And more importantly, provide them career paths. Show them that there is a way for them to not only attain the job, but retain and advance and lead their organizations. We have a significant opportunity in addressing this gap in the marketplace for talent. The resources are out there. We just need to pay attention to it, and more importantly, we need to engage it much more differently than we have in the past. Let me just share some of the findings that we have from the Salary and Career Report. This is based in North America, so you have to, again, assess it how it impacts into your particular region. But I think what we're seeing is a little bit of a sea change in terms of not only recognition, but compensation for individuals in supply chain. This is one of the most dynamic fields that we have. The placement rates for individuals graduating from supply chain programs, they're finding jobs in less than 3 months. They're finding significant pay for their organization, from their organization, and more importantly, they're seeing significant opportunities for pay increases. But this has to be matched at every level for every individual in the organization. It cannot just be for a specific segment of their marketplace. But what's important and what's critical here is that as we look at the median salary for individuals, that it's over $80,000 in the 50th percentile. That's a significant pay for individuals within the marketplace. Additionally, it does provide a career opportunity and career paths for individuals. If you're mentoring or if you're advising a young professional right now about where and what opportunities lie before them, I cannot think of a greater opportunity than in supply chain to make a difference in the world. This provides, as we discussed in the beginning, an opportunity to impact every aspect of the organization, from production all the way to reverse logistics to planning to innovation. This is a dynamic field. We just need to ensure that we have the appropriate talent to execute on it, not only today, but in the future. Lastly, certifications do matter. As indicated in the chart here, supply chain professionals with at least one APICS or ASCM certification on average earn 20% and 27% more than without a certification. And we see those certifications on the bottom. Why is that important? Because what we're recognizing and what organizations are recognizing is that individuals with these certifications enhance the success of organizations. They're not paying just because you have the certification. They're paying because you make their organization more successful, more profitable, and they pay for that profitability and that advancement of their organization. So it's clear that when you get a certification, that you are contributing to organization success. So we truly believe that we can make a better world through supply chain, and that we can use supply chain as a force for good. Certifications is one way to demonstrate your competency and your commitment to your profession. I urge you that if you're considering a certification, take a look at the various certifications and certificates that we have to enable you not only to get the job, but to have a career in supply chain. I can't think of a greater opportunity than supply chain has today to make a difference in the world. We truly believe that we can influence and impact the world through supply chain by developing people. We believe that if we develop people and they contribute to their organization's success, that more effective and efficient organizations contribute to better economies, and better economies improve lives. But more importantly, or as important as that, is that we need to focus on the impact that supply chain has on our lives and on the environment. This is not without consideration for the impact that supply chain has. I couldn't be more pleased with the work that our supply chain professionals have done through the pandemic and before the pandemic. It's now time for supply chain professionals to take that leadership role in their organizations and be the resource for companies to help them not only respond to the current challenges, but to ensure that they are sustainable in the future, not only financially, but environmentally and ethically. We have an opportunity to make a difference. Each one of you has an opportunity to make a difference. I can't wait to see the impact that supply chain professionals have, not only on each of our lives, but on the world as a whole. I couldn't be more proud of each and every supply chain professional for taking up the challenge to address not only the pandemic, but the long-term sustainability for supply chain. I want to thank you so much for participating today, and SAPICS, as a partner of ours, will be there for you, not only today, but in the future. We work through partnerships, and it's through these partnerships that we know that we are responding to the challenges of our supply chain professionals. So I urge you, engage with SAPICS, engage with your local partners to ensure that they are hearing some of the challenges, some of the opportunities that you face. Only through this exchange can we ensure that we are responsive to your needs, and more importantly, to your company's needs and to your community needs. We, again, believe that we can make a difference to a supply chain, but it's you that makes the difference to a supply chain. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Abe. As ever, hitting the nail right on the head and giving us information that's up to date and factual. And just really, I wanted to ask you, did you ever think when you first became involved with APICS, ASCM, that you would ever hear supply chain management being talked on Good Morning America or the breakfast time TV shows, or people having an opinion on whether supply chain professionals know what they're doing?
It's quite a transformation that we've been experienced over the past couple of years. To your point, I think most of us had problems explaining what we did to our friends and our family. What do you supply and what kind of chains do you work on? And so to your point, I think it's been, rewarding that there's an awareness of supply chain, but I think there's also a misunderstanding as to what supply chain is. Oftentimes, it's just, did I get my product at the time that I wanted it at the price that I needed it? And I think oftentimes now we need to extend our awareness of supply chain beyond just did I get my product to the impact that supply chain has. And I think we're experiencing that, whether we're talking about the Suez Canal blockage or we're talking about sustainability and the fires that are causing disruptions, not even mentioning the impact the pandemic has had. I think that the awareness of supply chain has increased. Obviously, I think we need to do a better job of explaining the impact that supply chain has.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And I think that, it's been really interesting just watching how people have immediately assumed things are going to fall apart, and they just haven't. And I can remember years ago, one of our speakers equating supply chain management to the sewage system and getting absolutely slated by a number of people. And it is that if it doesn't work, then people notice it. But I think one of the things that a COVID silver lining, if you like, is that people are realizing it because it's working in most instances. And we've still got a long way to go. There are still lots of twists and turns in this saga. So we can continue to pat ourselves on the back, but we can't rest on our laurels, I think is the thing. I've got lots of chats and stuff, and Annette, I'd just like to not call you out, but I'd just like to call on your comment. Is this the reason we're losing talent in South Africa? I think that's a conference all on its own, actually. It's an enormous question with a lot of challenges. And I think that, with organizations like SAPICS and other professional associations, that's what we're trying to do, is to make sure, and by aligning ourselves to organizations like ASCM, who've got that international knowledge, hopefully we can then bring some of it back and try to, I'm not saying that we always need to look at east or west for what's best, because we do know, but it's always good to be able to benchmark. And I think that's what we all need. And education is not just in textbooks, it's how we share with each other. Prince has been every session. He's challenged me with a question, and I've got one for you here from Prince, which is another conference in itself, which is how to meet the challenges of supply chain in Africa and what approaches should be adopted to meet them. See what I mean?
Yeah, a really interesting question, because I think if we dial the clock back prior to the pandemic, I think most of us were focused on career-oriented individuals, that they identified a job, role of responsibility, but they stayed within supply chain and they understood the roles that they wanted to take within supply chain. First, it's important to note there is no job called supply chain. There are jobs within supply chain similar to engineers. There's no job called engineer. There are different types of engineer. Similarly, we have that within supply chain. So first, identifying the career path. But, that was, our holy grail, was getting those individuals competent and capable prior to the pandemic, was always on that career-oriented individual. I think we've got a dual problem now. Not only do we still have that awareness and that recruitment challenge for career-oriented individuals, but now at entry level. We just don't have people capable of getting the job, entry-level jobs. So I think we have a great opportunity on both ends of the spectrum to develop that opportunity for individuals that are looking for careers, but first get them on the job. So that's the first step. But you need threshold competency. Individuals and companies need to be capable and to be able to deliver on the different types of supply chains that we're looking at. And I think this is where the challenges occur, is that we're not dealing with the same competencies that we dealt with 5 and 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with a lot of digital transformation. We're dealing with a lot of technology. We're dealing with a lot of data. And so the knowledge worker and the dependency on capable and competent individuals has elevated because of the changes that we've seen within supply chain, only accelerated by the pandemic. So yeah, absolutely. I think there are significant opportunities at both ends of the spectrum. And to meet that, I think we've got to develop a greater awareness of the career paths that are available for supply chain. And there is not a career path. There are multiple career paths.
Yeah, great answer. And thanks always for the questions, Prince. Renee, it's great to see all these names in the room. It's so weird not being able to see you all. But Renee asks regarding Scope 3 emissions, what standards and guidelines exist regarding measurement protocols, definition, data, standards, etc. across the supply chain? And then Liesel, I'm going to segue these questions because Liesel also asks about, is there education available specifically around sustainability within supply chains? And I think you can answer that with the sort of the plans and knowledge that you've got up your sleeves.
Yeah, I think we need to approach it from two perspectives. First, from the organization's perspective on establishing and reporting out. I don't think we have a question on what the standards are. I think we have a commitment issue with organizations establishing your metrics and, more importantly, reporting out on your progress on those Scope 3 emissions. So that's first. Secondly, relative to the talent, in some respects, sustainability is similar to supply chain or the jobs of supply chain back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We really don't know what it is. We know that there's an opportunity there, but we don't know what the role responsibility of sustainability professionals are relative to the other jobs within the organization. So we're talking about climate change officers. We're talking about supply chain officers. We're talking about sustainability professionals. I think we need to recognize the body of knowledge that exists for sustainability is a little bit sparse. We're not as deep within the sustainability content as some of the other areas within supply chain. I think there's a couple of those areas. Reverse logistics also comes to mind in terms of needing to develop more content and support for those individuals. We're taking a look specifically at those threshold competencies for sustainability. I think first we need to develop that body of knowledge, and then more importantly, to be able to all agree that this is what sustainability means to organizations. And I think this is where we have a significant challenge because sustainability is different in almost every industry. So you can't apply the same sustainability standards that you would to a food company that you would to an aerospace or an automotive company. So I think there are some commonalities that we all need to recognize, Scope 3 emissions being one of them. But then I think we need to get a little bit more specific for the various industries and to define what sustainability means to them. And then more importantly, report out on the impact that their supply chains are having.
Yeah, great. I think the thing that I love most about organizing conferences with supply chain professionals is that everything gets delivered on time. So that's how I'm gonna wrap this up. But as always, Abe, you bring along such an insight into the research as much as anything that's going on around us, and that we can then draw on through the reports, etc., that are issued by ASCM, as well as all the benchmarking activities, etc. So, again, this is a great partnership. It's one that I really value bringing to South Africa every year. It would be nice to be able to do it more often. We were getting there, and then we got stopped. But, we're finding our way around this virtual world. So hopefully we can make it happen. And we've certainly got Abe lined up for a couple of other sessions throughout the rest of the year. So keep posted, everybody. But thank you so much for getting up so early. We really do appreciate it. And I'm delighted you had your coffee before we called you onto the stage.
My pleasure, Jenny. And as you, I am hopeful that sooner than later we can all get together and put this challenge behind us. We have a wonderful opportunity, but more importantly, the engagement that individuals have with SAPICS and the support that SAPICS provides supply chain professionals is extraordinary and exceptional. You can't replace that relationship development that SAPICS provides for our members. And more importantly, the partner network is critical to our success, and more importantly, to the success of supply chain. We need to demonstrate that commitment to our members and, more importantly, the companies that they serve. And I can't think of a better organization than SAPICS.
Thank you, Abe. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And thanks for all these wonderful, I love these floaty blue. Can you see them, Abe? They're like little bubbles of approval. They warm my heart. So thank you all very much. I don't know whether Abe's got time to hang around for a bit, but look out for him. Maybe he'll pop back over the next 2 days. You never know. Absolutely. And otherwise, go choose your next session. Don't forget to do the poll saying what a great session it was and how absolutely fantastic Jenny was during it. Forget Abe. And thank you all very much for attending this session. And I'll see you in the next one. And Abe, thank you so much again.
My pleasure, Tim.
Safe trip home, as it were.